Boy. Humboldt Bob.
You could have blown the smoke out right when I turned it on. That'd have been awesome. But Fanboy in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and Humboldt Bob somewhere in Northern California. And today we're going to be continuing our talks about the the series of James Bond movies. We talked last time about Sean Connery. There were 6 Bonds. We talked about Sean Connery. I did a little research, and my God, there are a lot of podcasts on James Bond. I mean, there's one group that's done like 160 different podcasts on it. So I did a little research, but today we're going to talk about Roger Moore, which is, he's a bit controversial, completely different than Connery. Connery is more of a gruff, kind of a gruff guy. He was a tougher Bond, of course. He got hurt doing a lot of his stunts because he hit Craig. Almost all of them, Lazenby included, did their own stunts. But Roger Moore wasn't interested in that. He never did. He always had a stuntman do his stuff for him, right? And I noticed that when I was watching the movies, I could tell he had a stuntman. It was pretty obvious in certain scenes. But before we get started and all that, I just want to get your reaction because you grew up, you know, watching it on video. I mean, I was not a big Roger Moore fan at the beginning. He's kind of grown on me over time. And the more I learn about it, and the reason the people know so much about him because he wrote 4 books about just being James Bond. He cashed in a big time on a lot of his Bond and his Bond experience, and he stayed with it until he was 58. He did not retire from being James Bond until he was 58 years old. And Connery was 52 when he did Never Say Never Again, which was, the one done in the 80s. But anyway, so you saw it on video as a kid. What did you think of Roger Moore?
Which one's Roger Moore?
He's
This is
the
For Your
70s.
Eyes
I
Only.
call him the disco Bond.
Oh yeah. Uh, I think he was pretty cool. Yeah, like you said, he's a disco Bond. Probably did a lot of cocaine.
I don't know if he was a big drug user. He has a very interesting story. He started out as a cartoonist. He wanted to be a cartoonist and an artist, and he at 16 he got a job at one of the English London movie studios working as a cartoonist. But evidently he wasn't that. He was good, but he wasn't great. And they want great. It's very competitive, right? And so
Yeah.
they put him on as a errand boy along with his cartooning job. And then one day he forgot to pick something up, and they fired his ass. So he got his first job. He got fired, and so he went from then. He worked his way into being an extra, and then some guy noticed him, and pretty soon they because they liked his good looks, they were sending him to America to do a few movies, and then he came back and he started doing some more English stuff, and then he got a couple of TV shows, and then he got The Saint, which is like his big TV show that lasted almost 10 years. It was it was a long haul. And interesting enough, Ian Fleming wanted Roger Moore to play James Bond. He did not like Sean Connery. He thought of Sean Connery as more of a truck driver type of guy, and he wanted the more suave, sophisticated, which is kind of the way Roger Moore came across, right? So
Yeah.
Roger Moore basically had to basically bow out from being James Bond until he finished The Saint, because that Saint had a contract to do that TV show, and then they wanted him to do because when Connery quit, they wanted him to do On His Majesty's Secret Service, but he still had other commitments, so he couldn't do that. So finally, when it came to the after On His Majesty's Secret Service, it came to Live and Let Die in 1973. He was finally able to enter the role, and Ian Fleming was, and he brought a whole different type of thing to it. The movies were different. There was more humor. There's a little bit more comedy because Roger Moore is better at comedy than Connery was. A little bit more lightness to it, and as we were talking about the disco part, evidently he had his helped design all of his own clothes for that show for the
Oh,
movies,
really?
and it really made an impact on the 70s, on the 70s fashion, right? So
Yeah.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought he was just being influenced by the 70s, but it turns out he was more of the influencer, right?
Yeah.
So that what else did
So,
you see did you discover in Roger Moore?
He's did you do that ski scene? Did you do the ski scenes or
He says he's a skier, but I think he said even the ski scenes he had stuntmen. The one time he did get hurt was in Man with the Golden Gun, where he no, not Man with the Golden Gun, Live and Let Die. That's is where he learned his lesson, I guess, to use stuntmen. And Live and Let Die, the very first one, Live and Let Die. I put down Live and Let Live on my list, Live and Let Die. Um, he on those there's a big scene where the boats are getting being chased around, and Man with the Golden Gun, same thing. They have a big boat scene in Thailand, in the floating markets on that river, right? You should watch Man with the Golden Gun again. Since you've been to Thailand, you might find it a little more interesting.
oh, is it on the river?
Yeah, they're on the river there, right where we were. They're doing some chase scenes, but that was the second movie. But in the first one, they did it on the bayous in Louisiana, and he got in a boat accident and knocked out some of his teeth and ruined and harmed his knee. So from then on out, he said, "I'm getting stuntmen to do this stuff, right?" So that's one reason he stayed in it as long as he did, is longer than most of them, because he made uh, 6 movies. Let me see. That's another thing. Connery was just not to change the pace here, but Connery was a bit actor, and he's played villains before he became Bond. So nobody really knew who Sean Connery was. He was like he came out of nowhere. He came out of this like doing bit parts in movies and playing villain. I've seen him in 50s movies where he's a villain and just little, just smaller parts. I think maybe he had a couple leading roles, but Roger Moore had been around for 20 years, and he'd been doing TV shows. He was a fairly recognizable actor. Um, and when he started out, when that guy discovered him, he sent him to acting school, and he hated acting school. He said, "I hate it. They're trying to make me do this and that and suck all my personality out of me." And he quit. He dropped out of acting school, and basically, when he got to Hollywood, one of the guys said, "You know what? You're not an actor. You're a leading man." I guess there's a difference between it being an actor and a leading man, right? He said, "You're not an actor. You're a leading man." So basically, he just was placed as a leading man for most of his entire career, which the biggest part of his career was James Bond, right? Which is
James
the
Bond,
ultimate, because of the ultimate leading man. So I think in the 80s, before the 80s, Connery had done 6 films, and Moore had done 6 films with Your For Eyes Only and Octopussy. But then Connery went out and basically he wanted to basically after Octopussy or after Your Eyes Only, he wanted to retire from James Bond. He didn't want to do it anymore. But then Connery came out of retirement and made that other movie, Never Say Never Again. So basically now Connery had 7 movies, and they had a bit of a personal competition with each other, right? They were friends, but they liked to compete. So he said he had to make one more movie just so he could at least tie the number of movies with Sean Connery. So between them, they each made 7 James Bond movies, right? Which is funny. I don't know if Connery did it because he was competing with Roger Moore. I don't know if that ever came up, but basically he made that last movie, which was kind of not great. I'm talking about Roger Moore, A View to a Kill. Did you ever see A View to a Kill with Christopher Walken? Made in 1985. Because it's interesting because James Bond, the Roger Moore's James Bond stays this. It's supposed to be just the same guy. He never changes. He never gets older. He's hermetically sealed. He just stays the same age all the way through every movie he does. But actually in real life, everybody can tell he's getting older. He's like his leading ladies. He could be their grandfather, literally their grandfather. So by the time he got to that last one, A View to a Kill, which was in the 80s, we had all these other. I didn't even go see that movie in the theater. I wasn't interested. Absolutely zero interest in Octopussy And the only thing I liked about Octopussy was the name, right? Right in the 80s, and they picked Christopher Walken as the bad guy, and they have Grace Jones, who was a singer from the 80s. That was the only thing that kind of like reminded you that you're in the 80s, you know. Christopher Walken when he machine gunned all the workers with a wicked smile on his face. Oh yeah, this is the 80s, baby. Because but even Roger Moore didn't like that scene, but I'm thinking this is the 80s. I mean, this is what, you know, this is the crazy shit that goes on in the movies because Schwarzenegger was making, you know, his movies at that time. Indiana Jones was coming in. Rambo was there. So you had all these other guys, action stars, and James Bond was like, not all that interesting. So he actually, his best movies to me were The Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only. And For Your Eyes Only was a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more, you know, toned down. It was more of a real James Bond movie. That's what I found. When I watched it, I go, oh, this is more, instead of all the stupid gadgetry and all the, you know, all the silliness that goes on. It was a pretty straightforward, you know, story about revenge and everything. And it's a fairly good movie. And when he died, when Roger Moore died in London at one of the theaters, the two movies they picked to play in tribute to Roger Moore were For Your Eyes Only and The Spy Who Loved Me. Those are the considered his two best.
Fanboy and Humboldt Bob.